Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unfolding the Soul. It's been a while, I think, but I hope everybody's still watching. Today, my guest is Adam. He's here with us to talk about education. Um, he is still he's kind of stopped being educated, and he went on to the new level, but
Just
he's he,
recently.
he's a student of history, so that's one of the expertises that he's been holding in this little corner of the internet. So yeah, Adam, when we're talking about education, what are we talking about?
Well, I'd say education. I'm just going to pull out the etymology because that seems to be right for me. It's like it's the bringing up, right? It comes from the Latin educatse, right? So it's a kind of bringing up towards something higher. I don't know what. Um, you know, in the past I might have said knowledge, but a bringing up to something higher that spans one's entire life. Um, yeah,
So how would we define higher? Like,
sure. Higher. I'd say that's like acquired acquiring. Yeah, why not wisdom? I think
wisdom.
that's at the heart of it. Or acquiring the tools to relate to wisdom.
So if I interpret wisdom as the ability to have grip, would
Yeah,
that be, yeah? So in some sense, educating someone is allowing them to handle something or
yeah,
teaching them how
to
to
grasp
fish.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And then the other aspect of the definition was bringing up, right? So
Yeah.
what would that look like?
Well, bringing up would be like, I mean, the most obvious example I have would be like parents, right? That people always use the word upbringing, but then they use education, and they don't realize that that's it's the same word. And so when somebody's talking about their upbringing, it's like it's as you start as a child, and you don't really have much. I mean, you could do stuff, but you need a direction, and there's a kind of guidance or a bringing that your parents kind of not give you, but you know, put upon you, and that is that bringing up is kind of bringing you closer to acquiring those tools to relate with wisdom.
Right. So Vervaeke has this line is to make someone into a person.
Mm.
So I think that might be because it's it's yeah, like the problem is like what are you bringing into, right? Like there's a implicit telos involved in all of these actions, and
Yeah,
in some sense you have the emergence, right? Like the creativity of the student, and then that has to be guided and pruned in ways so it can take the right shape. So yeah, like how do you feel that education relates to you? Like, what is it like? Is that a specific feeling that you have when you're educated, for example?
yeah. I think it's something like kind of awe at how little I had before, and even being given so, like, or even having acquired something, like, to kind of awe and thankfulness that I can even have that interaction, have that um uh sort of addition, let's say, or that kind of rate, going higher. Um and I think the earliest time I can remember that is probably, oh, maybe 5 or 6, my dad was really, he always had a positive attitude towards kind of learning, right? And that was something, and it was never something as much as, oh, here's a piece of information, or here's a proposition, like learn it. It's more like a way of kind of being in the world and relating to it.
Hmm.
And that was kind of, yeah.
So when you're talking about there's an element of self-awareness, right? Because like I
Yeah.
can imagine that you're being educated and you're just dragged along by the teacher, right? Or maybe guide is a better word. Um, but you found a way to have an R relationship. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Sure, because it's kind of, it's not so much that the teacher kind of, teaches you. I think that's more, and as I look back on it, there is a distinction between education and schooling, where it's like I was in school for, up until now, basically up until the last month or so, I've been in, let's say, what people would call full-time education. Really, it's kind of more like schooling. Education can happen in there, but it's not. I don't even think that's the purpose of it anymore. And I mean, in relation to that, it's like, well, ha- well, where are we? What was the question again?
Well, I was asking you for your relationship to R.
Awe and education, right? So, I have no awe with schooling, not at this point.
Mhm.
And that was important in realizing that those two things were distinct, and I was really kind of looking towards education as such. This idea of kind of um acquiring, going back to acquiring tools to relate with wisdom, is like, that is, to be able to acquire that in an, like, not in an abstract sense, but like, like with, let's say, my dad or somebody like that, right? And you know being shown a way to
Mhm.
do things, and realizing, oh, that's something I can do now, and I don't have to kind of play around with necessarily play around with what I've done before. That's, I don't know. It's like a new space. That I don't know. It's just great.
So if I would phrase it like it's an increase in agency, right? And then
Yes.
there's an enchantment of the world, right? Like there's a new potential opening up as a consequence of you being able to see the world through the agency, and then having an appreciation for that fact.
Yes. Yeah. There came a point where I had to realize that the people who were my teachers, um, they could help me with education, but actually, to a large degree, they were actually an obstacle. That was
Mhm.
something my dad had to sort of, and it was a way in which he was kind of hammering on, like, learning. You need to find out new things, and it wasn't like a moment. It was more spaced out over a couple of years, and he kind of um put across, like, you need to get through this. You need to, almost like, you need to bring yourself through this, um so that, and the idea that was, you go to college, or basically the idea is you can go and complete your task, um and that freed me up, because it meant that I had to listen to the teachers, but it wasn't like I was kind of chained to them. Like, it was kind of like a, oh, I can do other work out of class. I don't have to be resentful towards the teacher because they're kind of pressing down on me. It's like, they're a human too. Actually, that's one thing that I noticed during schooling, is that there were people, and fair enough, who they had a relationship with the teacher where they really like they disliked them. They'd talk about them. It wouldn't just be that they kind of talk about them poorly, but like you could that they were kind of trying to put across a kind of like a wrathful
There's a
dislike,
embitterment.
embitterment. Yeah. Um. Whereas and it's not that I never experienced that, but once that, let's say, that kind of moment happened, I could let go of that and realize, this teacher doesn't have to have everything right. Um, I need to work with them as much as I can to get where I need to go. But if they become an obstacle, I just have to move past them as best I can as well.
Mhm.
And that, I mean, that in terms of how that allows agency, it's like I know there were guys in my classes, for instance, who got so embittered they never moved on from that, and even though they had the ability, the capability to do well, do whatever that, like some of them had ideas of doing things that they ended up not following through on because of that embittered relation. And in that context, that's where I'm kind of like, that's kind of all, like that is quite full of awe, because I'm like, wow, that's a gift that I didn't necessarily have to have, you know,
Mhm.
but it was allowed kind of I was allowed to have it because I was allowed to grasp it because, well, my relationship with my dad, right? I know others around me, other family members, um, but having that right attitude towards life in general, I suppose, right? The realization there is that even people in authority are humans as well, and you have to deal with that, and it's not something you can ignore.
So, so what I'm hearing is you got cultivated in some sort of a standard, and you were able to apply that standard in the non-house situation,
Yeah.
and therefore that allowed you to create a distance and a space to find self-expression.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, like I want to point back then to the cultivation of the standard, right? So there's this space that your dad is providing for you. So maybe you can give an example of how that would work.
So he would, for instance, ask me questions about just anything, right? One thing that we always talked about was history. So he or stories, and so that would allow we talk, maybe about, for instance, Alexander the Great, right? And in retrospect, we went over a lot of the same territory, but in that loop, there was a kind of room for exploration that was like, oh, what happened there? He might, for instance, mention something new in a conversation, and maybe it wasn't intentionally kind of, I'm going to set this up, but it was more like a, oh, and it turned out that Alexander, went to Egypt and declared himself pharaoh. So all those pyramids you see in Egypt, well, Alexander kind of grafted himself on into that kind of space, and it's like, oh, that reveals a new kind of face to what we're this loop that we're in, kind of, or it might be, another example would be, um this is more recent, electronics. He was very good at electronics, and it's like, I'll show you this skill and maybe you can use that. um so yeah.
So is that like a decontextualized exploration? Is that maybe
Yeah,
like
yeah,
there's
like it
no
would just,
purpose to it except the exploration itself?
yeah, and so we just he'd strike up the conversation with me, and I'd be like, hey, great, I can, let's talk to dad for a bit when he's got a break from work or whatever.
Hmm.
And it would wander, like it wouldn't kind of just stay in the same loop. We could start with Alexander the Great and then move on to like Tolkien, and then we talk about stories and like, well, why did this guy do this, and what about that kind of, you know what about that made him, good or great? Maybe not expressed in those terms, but like, why didn't he do this? or whatever. Why didn't um why didn't Gandalf, let's say in the Lord of the Rings kind of analogy, why didn't Gandalf show his powers and show his destroy the great evil that was Sauron? Why wasn't that allowed? You know, and part of that is that it's not that's not part of the plan. The greatness in Gandalf is not that he has all of this power. It's that he's guiding people to do the right thing and to achieve their potential.
Hmm. So if I envision this, is this more, oh, look at that, and oh, look at that, and you just like running across the field picking up shiny stones, or is it more wrestling and
More recently, it's become more like wrestling. But in the past, when I was, maybe up until now, 17, 18, it was pretty much the same. Like, oh, you know, look at this.
Mhm.
And as I got older, I could kind of offer things to him like, hey, look at this. And he's like, oh, yeah, that's cool. um, but that was a vehicle to, not just talk about, but also like, yeah, I mean to get that relation, like to kind of even to kind of reestablish relation with those tools as well, like especially if you're talking about stuff that's going on like in my life or whatever, and he'll be like, look, you have to, like recently, if it were a job, it would be like, look, you got to choose what you want to do here, but you got to follow through on it, sort of thing. um and like that's much separate to stuff that we've covered in the past, like the teachers or whatnot.
so now there's a more like man up attitude behind
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned other families, right? Like, so did you have an identical relationship, or is the personality something that's really important in how this manifests?
Um, I think so. How it relates to, so like my dad's side of the family, there are a lot of different personalities, but I think you still have that same sort of exploratory conversation. Um, it's not just like a, obviously more so with my dad because I'm more like, I'm closer to him, right? So we see each other more often, so the opportunity arises. But the personality will kind of determine maybe the boundaries of the exploration, let's say. And for instance, with my grandmother, it's it's going to be kind of largely, again, kind of abstract topics, nothing very personal at all. But yeah, so
Hmm. So in some sense, it was a means of communing within your family, like the exploration is it's so.
yeah, I'd say
Yeah,
so.
maybe you want to go into that a little bit. Like, so there's a level of intimacy there, and I think when you're mentioning, well, depending on the person, that defines the bounds, right? So, like, in some sense, the bounds are your capacity to be in relation to them. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's an interesting one. Was this it kind of goes like this. So I want to know more about. I was at one point I was interested in family history, and so I went ahead and I was like, well, I better guess. I suppose I better find out more about my grandfather. Well, I know my grandfather, who's my great grandfather, and all that sort of stuff. And when I'm asking around and I'm doing this kind of same exploratory thing, my with my dad, it's like, well, he can't really give me much information on that. For whatever, in that case, it was because of his relation with his mother. But you know, I went to my auntie, so his sister, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I mean, I have a family tree somewhere here," you know, and she rolls it out, and it's like, "Oh, that's kind of cool," and there's a whole context set up there where, well, maybe one of my grandfathers was uh, a blackguard, a bit of a, he ran off. He was English, and he ran off. He married an Irish woman, and he married an English woman first, and he ran off on the English woman, right? And went to Ireland, and that's part of the reason I'm here. So that's a big
Uh-oh.
yeah, that's a big piece of information, and it's like, whoa, well, that actually explains a lot. and
That's my need to run. That's
yeah,
where that's coming from.
yeah, that's it exactly. And I'm like, wow, that's and my dad said, oh, I never got that information from my mother. And I was like, I'm not going to ask her. Apparently there's a lot like kind of hush hush about that sort of stuff. And I look at my mother's side of the family, and you see actually something not exactly the same, but kind of, the skeletons in the closet um kind of thing. And it's like, oh, so for instance, my grandmother's personality is such that she'll talk about anything except when it gets close to the really personal. Like, it's almost like it's the really personal, the really intimate stuff. That's far off. We don't care about that. Let's talk about, oh, you need to get a job, or your little cousin, he needs to go and um uh he needs to go and to college, instead of doing a trade or something like that, right?
Mhm. So when I'm hearing that, like there's an opportunity for intimacy, but apparently it's also a means of avoiding intimacy as well.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, that I think so. Because if you think about that, and or if you take the same kind of pattern of exploration, I don't have that with my mother's side of the family so much. Like, we don't engage in that sort of idea of oh, look, here's something cool. Um, it's more it's more like, how are you doing?
Hmm.
You know, how are you doing? How is your friend getting along? That sort of stuff. Um, but then also, like, and that's it doesn't matter whether they're men or women. It's like that's the kind of relation. Even with my male uncle on my mother's side, it's like it's more on that front. It is more like kind of um not upfront, but like less less abstract, less kind of, let's go explore over there and be like, how are you doing? Do you need help? And do you need help with this? And kind of checking in on the everyday stuff.
So do you feel that there's a like an exclusionary element with the exploration that like it can only be pointed outward?
Largely, largely yes, except the only exception would be with my dad. But again, you don't get the intensely personal. It's like you'll be talking about the personal.
Yeah, like third
Ra-
personal.
Yes, yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So it would be like, you know, oh, but you got to do this, that's just, or some people are just like this, rather than sort of saying like, well, um, my dad was this sort of guy, this sort of man, and maybe you'd never get anything like that. Um, and if you do get near that, it's going to be like, yeah, it's going to be tense. There's going to be a tension around that. So
Okay. So let's hop back. So you're in school and you're slowly discovering that you're in a relationship to your teacher, and that they're not uh, divine beings, but
yeah.
actually mere humans. Um, so yeah, how does that shape you? Like, what changes does that uh, provoke in you?
Well, how that plays out is uh well, it's a case that I'm not too bothered by people in authority kind of not being excessively competent, or maybe not competent, but like, it's just, you it affords a kind of personal relationship with those people that maybe, you don't talk to them, but you also don't, for instance, leave the classroom and be like, that person, that's kind of an image of that person. It's like, no, that's a person that they have to go home today. They might have a bad day. And afterwards, that kind of, it helped me to deal with some of the disappointments that I might have had with schooling, which even during that period, I kind of still confused it with education. And actually, there came a point in college where first year, actually, it was kind of, the idea was, once you get past kind of secondary school, that's the impression that I had was, okay, that's when I start to kind of pursue almost an academic career, right? This is the kind of, this is where the education is going to flourish, right? And I found out actually that's not that wasn't what was going to happen at all. At least not in the way that I had expected. And so I got into college, and it was like, there are a lot of people. There are a lot of in Ireland. There are a lot of people who go to college. I think like 40% of the Irish population has a third level degree or higher, and I was kind of struck by the slowness of the kind of progression through these different topics. I did a degree in physics, so kind of we were going through stuff that we already went through before, and it's like, well, what's the deal? And I had to ask, and also I was introduced to a completely different way of kind of dealing with other students, because we had to kind of talk about the problem, we had to work through it. It wasn't just something that you kind of go off and do on your own. So it was kind of a different sort of task, and that threw me for a loop for a bit. But during that whole interaction, I realized that there's a difference. There's a difference between kind of education and schooling, because what they were kind of putting up obstruction. They were putting up the same kind of obstructions, and the obstructions weren't going away. Basically, in school, it's like the obstruction's going to happen. Well, that's going to happen. It's a secondary school, right? But once I get to college or whatever, it's like most of these obstructions are going to be gone, and I can just kind of do. I can look into whatever I like, and that's not what happened. um, and that threw me for a loop. But what it allowed me to do was realize, okay, these guys who are these lecturers, these teachers, they're here to get their jobs. I'm in a schooling scenario here. I need to move on. I need to move on and kind of get what I need out of this now. I'm in a new. I've found a new space. Let's move on. And what I did from that actually was I left. I transferred to a different college. Um, seeing Leaving the opportunity open for, hey, well, maybe this college will be better. Maybe the grass is greener on the other side of the hill. But if it isn't, whatever. I'll make it work. I'll overcome the kind of obstacle. And yeah, so that helped, because it allowed me to move on without any sort of embitterment. But it also helped me to detach sufficiently from the kind of intense emotion that I was experiencing because of that, let's say, that distinction, that contrast that I wasn't seeing, between let's say what I'm calling now education and schooling, right? So the upbringing, the kind of um, as opposed to the sort of just go through, do the motions, get your exams done. Because I think if I hadn't been in that scenario, or if I was looking at the lecturers as these sort of kind of divine beings who could do no wrong, I have no idea. I have no idea where I'd be right now. Probably in a PhD position, hating my life.
So you mentioned the introduction of cooperation
Yes.
in the educational process. So did that change anything for you? Like, was that a thing that you could end up using for your own benefit?
Yes, because I saw beyond, um, let's say all the information I had, the knowledge. Let's say all the knowledge I had, wasn't necessarily just for me, and that maybe other people could benefit from that. In fact, it was in that same year that there was a man who's about mid 30s, I think. He'd come back to college, and he didn't know much in the way of mathematics. He was kind of out of practice, and for me, it was going very slow. The kind of progression through the different methods that they're going to teach you to solve all of these equations. But for him, it was like really fast. Like he was, and you didn't see much of it, but you realized like he was, once the classes ended, he was going off and trying to catch up with some, like, tricks that we could do. Tricks, like it'd be a trick for me, and for him it would take maybe an hour or two just to understand what's going on. And there were times where I'd just set aside the time and explain one of those tricks. Use I'd share kind of the knowledge and be like, look, this is how this works, and here's why it works. And that knowledge was there because I mean, that that knowledge was there because I applied my, I didn't get embittered by the teachers all the way back in school, and I kind of learned those principles, that knowledge, and I passed it on to him. Came up to me afterwards and was like, dude, I really appreciate you doing that. Um, and so that offset the sort of the frustration that I had with the other kind of the negative experience that I had with cooperation in the rest of that year. Because and the negative experience came from basically wrong expectations, basically, because we had to work in groups, and I felt like I was being slowed down by them, by these other guys. But in reality, it's like, and he actually helped me out later on because he applied for a job in the college over the summer, and he mentioned that to me, and he's like, that opened up a space for me to be like, whoa, that's something I could do. I might look into that. I ended up transferring, but I did the same thing over over in the other college, and I that actually paved the way to my internship and trying to do a research master's. So the cooperation kind of opened my eyes to the the ability to give knowledge to others, or to help people attain knowledge, and then also to kind of gain knowledge, maybe experience myself.
Yeah, so it's like a different domain, right? Like
Yeah,
you're participating in a different domain, and in some sense, it's more being a person domain than being a consumer of information. Um,
yeah,
and so it seems like you found out that the teachers are humans and fallible beings, and then it took you a while to figure out that students are also humans
yeah.
and fallible beings.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. There was a time where I was dangerously close to getting embittered by the students rather than the teachers. It never got that far, thank God. But that experience made sure that experience in first year college made sure that was less likely to happen. I'm not going to say it's never going to happen. There's always more room for embitterment, just because I'm silly. I'm a human.
So have you been able to expand that insight outside of the schooling system, or are you still
Well,
working on
well,
that?
I'm gonna be honest. I'm still working on that. I think I've got it down so I can say for my parish, but sometimes not. Sometimes not. And, sometimes I see the folk group and the guitarist. I'm like, you really got to practice just kind of letting things go here. But yeah,
So yeah, like let's dig a little bit into this embitterment, right? So there's like, is that a sense of perfectionism that's driving that? It's like,
Yeah, I think so. I think as I look back on when I was younger, I was very much. It wasn't just that I was detail oriented; like I had to get it right first try. Um, and if I didn't, that would frustrate me. Um, and that's an insight that didn't actually come from me. It came from my mother watching me and then telling me, Adam, you really like to get things right on the first try. um, and that's like, and that's an insight that's only really kind of that I've gained on myself. The past few years, like maybe the past 3 or 4 years.
so
Um,
does that
yeah.
connect to not being able to lose games, or is that just a projection from my side?
Well, that definitely would have come into. That was definitely a worse problem when I was younger. Yeah, when I was much younger, I'd get angry. I've since learned to distance myself from the video games and realize that I've got other better things to be doing.
so so in some sense, you have a problem living in faith, right? Like
Oh
this,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's.
There's,
I mean, I for all that time I was an atheist, like a convinced atheist, from like
mhm.
the age of 12, let's say, on to 22 years ago. It was like I it wasn't like, oh, I went to church and I just kind of fell away. Like I never went to church. Like I got baptized. I got um first Holy Communion, and then conference. So I was probably I was in a church about 3 times in my life, apart from like except funerals, right? Which you just kind of you have to be in the church, and I was never happy about it. So I really thought, like, I thought that I knew the answer. Like, no, on the God question, like I have the answer for that, and the answer is negative. He doesn't exist, and so yeah, there's definitely that's something I struggle with, and it's a struggle that's only really kind of come to my attention the past like year or two. You know, um,
Mhm.
how is it that I can just kind of trust, and that's how I view it as well. It's like faith is trust, and in terms of trusting people, is that's and trusting in just things to work out. I'd say that's
Well,
the
I, I
common
would
common denominator.
I would argue that trust is the materialist side of faith,
Okay.
because trust is in things that are seen, right? Like
Yes.
there's a reliability aspect to the trust, while faith is relating to the unknown, right? Like you,
Yeah. I can trust that, I don't know, my calculator is going to work because that's all. It's a
yeah,
it'll be all in my hand. It's all in the circuitry.
exactly.
Um. But yeah, faith is, yeah, unseen. I get that.
so so you're in some sense like using using this as a mirror for your personal development, which I guess is normal, because like you spend a lot of time in school.
Yeah. Too much.
um,
Too much in retrospect.
and then, right, like you said you were talking to this guy and you were showing him the tricks, right? So in some sense, the student becomes the teacher, right? So
Yeah.
you're in this phase where you're slowly getting a grip on the other side of the coin. Um, so does that change your perspective on what education is?
Um. I think no, and the reason why is because I was really just passing on knowledge. In terms of education, the closest I've ever come consciously that I know of was taking out my little cousin to get some nice clothes, because I knew when I was maybe 15, 16 or 17, I never like I'd wear this and I'd wear that anywhere. And yeah, in retrospect, I kind of I thought And especially with the Christian stuff, they're like, all right, you got to take your body seriously. Like your body's a you can't ignore that. And that's actually an important part of you. And I'm like, okay, all right. And you're made in the image of God. And I'm like, okay, all right. Well, that's, so maybe I should care about how I dress. Maybe not too much because, you're just end up looking at yourself all the time, but enough. And so I look back on how I was at his age at 15. And I think, hey, if I wanted to try and put across the impression that your body actually is something that is important, maybe I can help him out. And so I said, well, maybe somebody could have brought me out at that stage, and said, hey, we'll get you a shirt, a tie, and some trousers. And it wasn't something I would have been used to. But one day he was coming up to my house for the day, and I went on a bus, got him a bus pass. We went into town and spent the day doing that. And it was at that point I saw myself reflected on me, and I was like, I have a lot more sympathy for my mother. Whenever she was trying to, I hated shopping for clothes, but she was, in retrospect, she was doing exactly what she needed to do at that time.
Yeah, that's one of the points that I submit to my mom completely. It's like, okay, like I don't want to deal with this. Like I'll listen, okay?
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly it.
Please help.
Please help. I can't, sizes. I don't know what size I am. It's just, now I know. I even know my collar size now. Um, but I still need her. I mean, when I got my first suit, she was there. So making sure that I looked all right.
So it's still really ineffable in some sense what education is and how to participate in it. So
Yeah.
it's really intuitive, and then sometimes you're in a situation you're like, oh, this is it. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I thought, look, I'll make the effort, and then I realized on the other side, it's like, and I only got a couple of days ago. We were sent a picture of him. He went to a job, and he was going to job interviews, right? And he wore all the clothes that I got him that day. And it's like, hey,
yes,
yeah,
yes, yes.
that's something that he mightn't appreciate now, but like, hey, it's nice that he could do that.
No, and this is maybe like a secondary way, right? So first you get your agency and you see the world through your agency, right? And now you see an extension of your agency in someone else manifesting.
Yes,
And
yeah.
that's a
And
whole new can of worms.
it is because it's because of that distance, right? So it's not like it's kind of, the control is completely apart from me. It's like I just have to. That's when the faith comes in. That's when I'm like, all right,
Yep.
there's stuff I'm not seeing that I'm like, that how is he using the agency that he has there now, So
Yeah.
I think definitely don't have enough experience of that, but I'm sure that'll come in time as well. That'll
Well,
definitely.
and the horrific aspect that's always true, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like, oh, like my agency is spinning off in someone somewhere, and I don't know what it's doing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think about, okay, well then what, going back to when I was in, my teenage years, it's like there were people who probably recognized that, who were trying to, help me out and giving me that agency. It's like, was I looking out for that? Was I using that sort of properly or whatever? And you're not going to use it all the way that they wanted to or whatever, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
but
true throughout all time. Throughout, it's going to be true throughout my life, but also the lives of others who influence that out and up.
yeah. So, man, I lost it. There's an element where you can take responsibility for what you're giving others, right? And also in the receiving of it, right? Because like now
Yeah,
you have this awareness, right? And like there's a way in which that allows you to change your relationship to education, right? Because now you kind of know, right? Okay, like it's an extension of their agency, right? So
yeah,
like like I can look at someone else as that they're informing me, and then that I can express or channel that into my participation. So have you thought about it like that? Like, is that a thing that's on your mind?
That yeah, that their response will inform how that I relate back to them. Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good way of thinking about it, because that's how it would have unfolded for my parents with me. Um, most definitely. I mean, I definitely gave them a lot of what responses. I definitely gave them a lot of uh, maybe not information, but signaling back to them.
Okay, but do you think that that's a thing that you could use, right? Like this perspective of extension of agency, and because my mind is going to surrendering, right? It's like, okay, like I am here gathered with you to surrender to what you have for me, so that I can, right?
Yeah,
And if I'm going to relate that to school, right? Like I think the issue that I have always had with school is that there was no application of what I learned at school. Like, it was just
yeah,
the test at the end of the course.
yeah,
Um, so there was no way of channeling it, right? And therefore there was also no way of justifying uh, my participation, in essence.
yeah. No, and that's the. I mean, that's the thing with schooling is that. I mean, in terms of agency, like you're limited by space, and they're going to have you in a classroom, they're going to sit you down, and you just kind of got to passively take it in. There's no kind of there is no agent, there's no active agency there, except in sports maybe, right? But uh yeah, and that's the thing. That's the thing about going back to the teachers, right? What my dad was highlighting to me was you have the agency, you can choose how to interact, how to relate to the teacher, so that you don't get embittered. Um, and that's how he was using his agent, like his agency, just kind of here's some information, um, and that yeah, that's I see how that works. I see how that's a good framing, and he could only yeah he could only do that because he's like, look, I gotta uh, let this just kind of roll. I'll give you information, see what you do with it. Maybe see what you reflect back to me, because he's definitely. I think he's learned. I'm sure if I asked him, he'll say that he learned a lot in educating me.
Right. That's kind of like the step that I want to go to, right? It's like because because there's this reciprocal process, right? It's like, okay, like if I'm on this side of the coin, like I'm only dealing with things being given to me, right? And then
Yes.
if I see how things are given, then I know what it means to receive, right? And now you can lift it a step up, right? It's like, okay, like, so there's a relationship between giving and receiving, and now I can optimize for for that thing. And like this is the thing I've always been looking for, right? It's like I don't care about this stuff here. I care about the stuff up there.
Yeah.
And but yeah, you've not delved into that, but you've
Yeah.
been helping out in Bible study, right? So that,
Yeah.
like, is that a thing that also qualifies as education?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it helped me. It helped me to put that in the context of kind of um, the, relating to other Christians. Um, that
So
was
why is it
helpful.
important that they're Christian?
Um, because they make a big deal about being Christian, and and
Okay.
apparently they're convinced that I'm one. I'm kind of on board, but at the same time, I'm a little bit suspicious, that kind of framing. and and so when they're talking, I mean, it was a good opportunity to learn a bit of Christianese, but it was also a good opportunity to come to a common subject. Knew nothing about it. I had no knowledge, basically no knowledge on the subject. Like, it was really kind of sparse and tangential. Whereas these guys were like, you know, they were talking about it, and they were kind of inviting out, like, what do you think? What do you think? But there was an education in there in terms of how to. There's a missionary there actually, and um, he was obviously kind of trying to bring you through the Bible and trying to give you some sort of foundation um, for the story, and kind of jumping between bits of it and whatever. And then he's like, and how does this relate to how we're going to go and practice the Christian life or whatever? I'm seeing him at mass every day, and we'll pray, and we pray together as well. So the Bible study is initiated with prayer and then finished with prayer. And so that helped to that helped me relate to people who were like praying, I suppose. But then there was me coming in from the this little corner of the internet, and there were times when I said stuff and they were like, "What are you talking about? We've never heard this before." Like, there was a time when it was like, what was it? I think I said the Peugeot thing of like, and I like, this is true. It's like, I go to church to deal with the people I don't want to have to deal with, and like, and they were like, what? Is he allowed to say that? I don't think they were that, that flabbergasted, but they weren't expecting it, because I think they were just used to dealing with students who didn't know much, and were just kind of in a similar kind of scenario where I was in school with when I was a teenager, right? Just kind of passively receiving. And so I guess through that, I kind of inadvertently, I wasn't there was no intention behind this at all. I was sort of inadvertently kind of um giving them something, but what they gave me in return was uh a, a way to, I mean, some way to relate to Christianese, but it was also just to people to talk to who weren't, friends from school, um who, you know had their own lives going on.
So yeah, you said something that I can't let go. It's like dealing with people who pray.
Yeah.
What
Okay.
does
Yeah.
that mean? What does that mean?
Well, they they go in, and they kind of do their they kind of pray off the cuff, and I wasn't expecting that, because the only exposure I had was kind of the very formal stuff, your sign of the cross and stuff like that. Um, and I guess it helped me to relate to people who were trying to relate to God, and me seeing how they were expressing that,
Hmm. So
because
is there education in there?
probably more than I'm willing to allow. Probably a lot more than I'm willing to allow. Uh,
So so
definitely
you
something to
like
do with
like
faith in there.
what's the attitude that I have to see you sitting there? Like, are you like observing as a skeptical observers, like, oh, now they're doing this, like,
No, no, it's more like, okay, we do this, and then like, I'm doing the sign of the cross, and then they just start talking, and I'm like, no, you just like recite a prayer or something. I don't know. Like, the way I got into all this is reciting the Our Father. So it was like, you know, and it's not that there was no thinking behind it when I'm doing it. Like, I try and actually think about what I'm asking, but they're just kind of they're let's say relating to God in a completely different way. That is kind of, I'm only really starting to consciously do this,
Hmm.
and they're doing it differently, and I'm like, well, what do I do with that? So I guess I'm a little bit suspicious.
Hmm.
Um,
But what are you doing with it? Like how are you processing this? Because like you seem to avoid drawing implications.
yeah, well, I just don't, well, like, because I honestly I don't know how to deal with it. It's like he's praying differently or whatever. You know, what next? Is
But
there a
like
right way to?
isn't that true in like your profession as well, that people use different methods to achieve similar aims?
Yeah, but apparently we're all in one body, and so it's like, okay, how does that work?
Well, yeah, but like when you make a glass, right? Like it can get into the same house as, as the other glass, or it can be made in the same factory, right? Like
Yeah.
these things exist in different areas as well. So I'm just wondering why you're making the distinction. Like,
Well, I guess it's just a kind of retroactive distinction. Like, they were people who, I mean, I do pray, maybe not as often as I should. Um, but those were guys who were active. The point being was they were actively practicing something. All of
mhm.
the people, like anyone else who might kind of nominally say, "Oh, I'm a Christian," or whatever. I never saw them pray. And at mass, if you're all gathered together, you are all praying, but it's very like, you know, it's kind of firstly, there's no silence in the church, so it's like, how are you even supposed to? It's kind of it's a bit of a show. So I'm like, well,
Is that show an actual show, or is that in your head?
no, I mean, if you look around, it's you would be forgiven for mistaking it for a stage.
Okay.
Like, is this everyone pointing in the same direction for a day? Like, not really. They're all doing other stuff, and they don't. You know, uh, that's very strange to me as well. It's like, okay, so we're
So,
all
so
gonna try and,
how's that different than people in your classroom, like other students?
well, I mean, in the classroom, they're not trying to relate to God, I guess.
Now they're trying to relate to whatever
The subject matter is.
subject is, right? And like the subject has a sacred status within that institution, right?
Yeah.
So like I get it, to me it's the same pattern, right? And like yes, and all these students they're doing crazy stuff, but like they're still wanting to get their exam, right? Like
Yeah.
so yeah, like I just wanna I don't want to linger too long on it, but like you're making a distinction, and I'm trying to find the basis
Of it. Yeah.
on which you're making the distinction.
Well, yeah. I
Is it just the sacredness? Like is this the perfectionism sneaking back in?
Yeah. Well, look. I mean, I think there's I do if I had to choose how mass or was celebrated or something like that, it would be, um let's say, the outward expression of, it would be a more perfectionist, let's say, form of it. Um, but yeah, and so in that
Well,
regard,
let's do the thought experiment, right? Okay,
sure.
so you're now the educator of how people should pray. What are we
Yeah.
doing?
Well, I mean,
Like we want to start at the basics, right? Like
I
we
don't
gotta
want the
get
job.
I don't want the job. Like
I know I'm not. I know I'm not qualified.
I come there half drunk still from the last night. Like, I go
Stumble
back to
in.
sleazing, dressly, like
Yeah.
sloppy.
Well, it's like with the church stuff, it's like it's not my decision, but I might prefer it to be one way or the other.
No, but
Um,
I'm trying to get back to this concept of education, right? Like
yeah.
like you have responsibility for education, right? And
Okay. Yeah.
um I don't want to keep it in church because I think the church is secondary for the example, right? But
Yeah.
it's more like, okay, like, but it's important because the church in some sense highly personal, right?
Yeah.
Like the way that you relate to the ineffable nature, right, is is unique to you, right? But
Yeah.
still, now you're having the responsibility to have the one body, right? Like to have this unified way of unifying uniqueness. So
Hmm.
so how do you do that?
Well, I just appeal to, let's say, traditional forms, right? The stuff that's lasted the longest, and say, hey, try this and let this form you, because as it and I'd say the same for education as well. It's like you aren't really going to get much um out of how should I say it? You're not going to get much out of just kind of doing what you think is right in the moment, or not even right in the moment, but just doing whatever you want. There has to be some structure to it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that structure, and if you don't have a structure that's lasted long, it's like, well, how are you going to ever sustain that relationship to to the ineffable, to God, right? And this is the funny thing is that, and this is why I don't really I don't get too upset about it, because it's like, look, this is just this is the way things are at the moment. Like, if I had a preference for a form of worship, or if I had a preference for a form of education, right, I would I would I would prefer that over the other ones, like the old, let's say, traditional, the let's say the one that's worked, that I didn't make up, but was, let's say, given to me, some in some sense kind of uh, given to me. It's like I'd like to pass that on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
So so in some sense, you want to effectively outsource it, and you want to take as little responsibility as possible, and put the responsibility on the past, on the tradition.
Um, yeah, pretty much. I'll double down on that. Um,
Okay.
I mean, in the case of education, right? If I were doing that for education, I guess I'd be putting forward a system which is kind of decaying, and I'd just be accelerating the decay. But you know what? Some institutions have to fall. Sometimes you have to just, it's like Alaric and the Goths. Sometimes you just have to burn down the kind of the the kind of excessive rubble, basically the excessive building of past.
Well, there's some fatalism in there. Wow.
Yeah. Probably.
So there's no place for your personal skills and your capacity to make a personal connection uh, to influence how you educate. Like you don't see that.
I think I no, I mean, I do there, because you have to engage with the person on where they're at, to try
Hmm.
and bring them forward. Like, I mean, for instance, for my cousin, I didn't bring him out to get him a suit or whatever, and then, say, and this is why you're dressing this way, young man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, I
It could
might
have
I
been
might talk
cool.
to him about, yeah, like, I might talk to him about that maybe when he's my age now, like, maybe when he's 22, right? And he's like, "Hey, Adam, why'd you get me those clothes?" or something like that. It's like, well, you know, um, or I might mention it to him and be like, "Hey, by the way." But yeah, there's you have to meet them where they're at. I mean, that's the same with some of my other little cousins. It's like, I can't I can't make them interested in maths. I can't kind of make them interested in um the stuff that I'm interested in, for instance, right? That was kind of passed on to me. But I can just say, hey, I mean, I can mention it and then see what they do with it.
Hmm. So, so do you have some identifiable strengths that you could apply in education?
Um, I'd say, well, I mean, I don't know how much intellect has to do with it. Um, I think I've a reasonably strong intellect in terms of being able to acquire knowledge or whatever. In terms of wisdom, I probably don't have much. No, I don't really. I mean, uh, but what strengths could I have? Abstraction.
Abstraction. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I can give you another one, right? Like you
yeah,
you got you got a historical contextualization.
yeah. Well,
Or,
sometimes when you proffer that, people don't like it.
well, yeah,
Most
yeah.
times they don't.
Well, you got to get better at the storytelling
I
because like,
suppose. Yeah,
but
that's how I learned.
so I guess I want to go back to the question, right? Like if you want to have an educational course, right? And well, maybe we want to wrap up first, right? So
Okay.
are we at the present, or are there any like developments that we still should touch on that we've missed?
Um, no, I mean at the moment I'm basically looking for a job at the moment. So, um, when I get the job, when I get a job, outside of let's say formal schooling, for any for any decent period of time, that'll I know that's going to be an education. I know there's going to be some re, reforming on my part needed just because of the time I've spent in schooling.
Hmm.
I mean, like I have an idea of how kind of working in a day-to-day job where you're getting paid for a wage works, but it's only an idea. I'm going to find out. I'm going to get the experience and the participation uh, pretty soon.
Do you have a sense of what's needing to be reformed?
Um, probably the way in which I relate to the daily routine of how to of getting things done. Because as things towards the end of schooling, towards the end of being in college, there was basically no structure, and it was only the structure that I imposed. And there were indications that the structure that I imposed wasn't sufficient to to meet the requirements.
How
Um,
diplomatic of you.
yeah, yeah, and that required course correction. And whether it was a fault on my part or others, but probably, I mean, look, whatever I did on my part, it led to me being like, well, I'm in a situation now where things are progressed beyond a salvageable kind of circumstance where I could move on and do well, whether that was in there from the start or whether I helped to bring that into being. I don't I don't quite I'm not quite comfortable saying yet, but I think when I get the job, I will find out.
Yeah, yeah. You're gonna find out many things.
Yeah,
So yeah, you're obviously gonna have to be educated in your job. Uh, do you plan on having education being part of what you're doing in your job, like an active aspect? Would
I
would you
think if I
like
have,
that?
yes, yes, I think it's and especially in the form of, let's say, teacher, because if I would like to get married at some point, and if I do, and I have children, I'll have to do the same that my dad did for me. Not the exact same, but the same sort of pattern of like, hey, I got to kind of draw that stuff out. And not that this is what's going to happen, but I'd like to have more kids than what my dad had. A lot more, as many as my great grandmother, who had 14. So, but
And you're
that's
just
completely
horny. That's
outside
all
my
I'm hearing.
control. Yeah, it's all I want. But let's see how this plays out.
So in some sense, you say like you want to prepare yourself for being a dad, and you want to use your work as a means to develop that capacity.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, let's hop like 5 years into the future, right? Like you get to do everything you want perfectly, right? Like you end up like 1 year in, you raise to the position in your job that you want to be, right? You start cultivating this educational stuff. Um, so what are you going to do? Are you going to dive into the tradition and find a way to revive what was there, or are you going to dive into yourself and find a way to be a vessel, or are you trying to do both and merge them in some way?
I think I have to do both, and the latter is probably going to be the harder one than the former, because diving the tradition is something which is just it's kind of there to hand. There's not really much more that needs to be done in some sense. Because I'm going to take that. But in terms of diving deeply into myself, I think there's going to be some preparation that needs to be done there, because um yeah, I think the other the kind of the tradition aspect is largely taken care of.
Well, yeah, like the fact that it exists somewhere and you applying it are two different things, though, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm relatively confident that I have the capability to apply it well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on basically just banking on being a human at that point. I mean, if I can't pass it on very well, then fair enough. I don't know how much else I can improve it, other than, let's say, inform myself more on it, and try and you know um, get better at handing things on.
So on the personal side, um, let's say you're God, right? Like you just get to put yourself through all the changes that you need to go through. Like what does perfect Adam look like? Which is ironic. It's like
Yeah,
he's walking in the garden.
yeah. Well, he's got a wife. Her name's Eve. Since taking the Bible seriously, and going to church, and trying hard at this Christian stuff. I've the reflecting on what my parents decided to name me has been interesting in and of itself.
Yeah, I got the same issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and so well, look, what would I look like? Um, Perfect Adam would be
Naked.
naked when it counts. Naked when it counts.
Before God.
Naked at least 14 times with his wife to be. Um, let's see, compassionate, more compassionate than I am now.
Okay.
Um, uh, wise enough to be a father, whatever that is,
Mhm.
however wise that is. Um, and and knowing himself and the past well enough to to help in the creation of a better future. If that was too
Yeah, to
broad.
point.
Yeah.
point that towards. Yeah, no, I'm gonna make it concrete. Just don't worry. So
Yeah.
so when you say compassion, right? Like you gotta have a way of applying that, right? Like where it's needed. So maybe you can expand on that.
Um. Well, I guess for those who are being educated, like let's say I don't know, I could be easier on those who I'm trying to help, um, because
Because
I
you
think
think you're a harsh teacher right now.
um inadvertently yes, because I just that's the impression that people get is that I'm particularly harsh. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know where that comes from. No, I mean it's, uh, but in the sense that I need to be more patient with where people are at, and
I'm
that's where
gonna
the that
add that to the list. Patience.
yes, um,
Because
uh,
being
yeah,
patient is different than being compassionate, right? Like because
yeah,
patience is effectively waiting for the right moment of action. Like so, I see it more as an aspect of humility, right? Like where you're placing yourself in incorrect relationship or correct grounds for relationship. So if I would turn that around, like you might have uh, a problem knowing your place or knowing
yes,
where to grasp on, right? Like
yeah.
what to reach out for. Okay. Um, so is there a specific aspect, right? Like where you would like to improve that you can identify right now, like in the grasping, like well, like if I could do this, then things would go a lot better.
Um, if I could, yeah, I mean, if I could,
We can go back to your nephew, right? Like what
yeah.
is the thing that you would have liked to give to him that you didn't give him?
Well, that would be an impetus to action. There were
Hmm.
times when we were out shopping and he wasn't willing to make a decision, and I just went, you know, I didn't make the decision for him. I went and made a decision, and then soon enough he followed with whatever, he bought something. Um, yeah,
So that's inspiration,
yeah, yeah,
right? So so the way I see inspiration, and that's actually like it's really funny in this unfolding the souls. If you look at it, right, like I'm doing the thing that's being talked about often. So it's like so I'm trying to inspire you right now. It's like when you inspire someone, right, like you
yeah,
need to give them a vision to participate in, right? Because
yeah,
like then that vision is going to draw them forward, right? Like that's the
mm-hmm,
tellus that they can participate in, right? So and this I kind of reference to this, right, like with putting it in a historical narrative, right, like that
right,
would be a means for people to make a connection to themselves, right? So
yeah,
so in some sense yeah you're trying to afford that connectivity, right? Or in other words, you're trying to create intimacy, right? And
mm,
in the intimacy, you kind of need to function like a bridge, right? For like the place where the other person is stuck to this paradisal way, and then yeah, right. Like the spirit is then the energy that captures them and moves them over the
mm.
bridge. Yeah. So does that inspire you to do something?
I no, I can't. I can't.
Well,
Well,
let's go to being a dad, right? Like so,
yeah,
okay, like you're with your child, right? And you're like, oh man, like I like my child is like always wants to play computer games, but like I wanna get my child to do this other thing. Like how do
yeah.
you go about doing that?
Well, you provide him a better alternative and be like, hey, look, we want to go out. Want to? I mean, hey, want to? Here be a good one. Do you want to go out? Um, and sling some stones with me, but down by the river, where we have to go and walk, and you have to step in the water and pick up stones from the riverbed, and throw them onto the other side of the uh, river, and I'll show you
Mhm.
how to make the sling. We can do it together. And hey, you want to if you want it's not if you want historical grounding, but like tell them about the story of David and Goliath, because that's where I heard it from. That's what I know.
Mhm.
That's part of how I know what a sling is.
All right. So what I heard you do a couple things, right? Because you're changing the arena that he's in, right?
Yeah,
So you're automatically already changing the way that he's participating, right? Because like you're not doing the same thing in your room, and you're not having the same distraction, right? Because if you're in the forest or at the river,
yeah,
like having you can't just go, oh, I'm going to sit behind the computer, because you have to go back first, right?
yeah,
And then there's also the potential in the new arena, right? Like there's these new modes of engagement that you can let be inspired by, right, in the moment. So yeah, like that sounds like a path, right? Like a
yeah,
sort of like a methodology where you can um, you identify that a person is having a type of participation, right? Like whether that's how they read their book in class, or whether that's sitting behind the computer all day, and you're providing them with an alternative and a means to get there, right? And like the
yeah,
combination, and then the exemplification in the thing, right? Like your enthusiasm in the throwing stones is then the third factor. I think that would
yeah.
come together there and make that work. Um, so yeah, wisdom. Um, you were a little bit careful around that. Like you don't see yourself having wisdom. Um, What would wisdom look like for you that you'd like to acquire?
Um, I'd say that the wisdom to know myself sufficiently well that yeah, basically to know myself, actually, to be honest. And it's quite easy to know about other things, and let's say man in general, but to know the particularities of um how I get on, kind of, yeah, gnosis, but not in the Gnostic sense, God willing.
Um, yeah, so you're wise. You're a child 5, right? Like you have
Okay.
this whole Dalton's thing going.
Yeah.
uh, uh, and so like what is the ideal? Like you get to do everything perfectly. Like what does your family look like? Like what is your family doing? Um, like what is it working towards?
um, a more a more connected way of living. So that would, in that case, it would probably be living somewhere out in the countryside, a connection to nature. You know, um, in terms of schooling, that's somewhat changed. So I wouldn't. Yeah, in terms of schooling, I guess homeschooling. But homeschooling in connection with real, getting out there into the world and relating to other people. That'd be a big one. So they'd be out, doing work whenever they can. Um, and yeah, there'd be a farm. They'd have to relate to animals as well. um, have connections to family. I mean, my parents would probably be coming up every week or so, more often. I don't know, however often they want to come up, to be honest. Um, and that they would all be on the road to becoming, I suppose, becoming people, but becoming
Persons.
persons. Yeah.
So you're talking about connection a lot, right? But there's also an element that is isolationary within the connection, which is somewhat paradoxical, right? So
Yeah.
you feel like there's a curation of participation that's necessary for right development.
Um. Yes. Yeah. And I think there are some aspects in which things, for instance, when I was younger, weren't curated sufficiently, so that I ended up having a poor participation because of it. Um, and there's, when curating the participation, it you have to be careful because it's not like it's going to be perfect, right? It's not. It's not most definitely not going to be, and so it's
Well, yeah,
prioritized.
you got to figure out what's the baby that you're throwing out with the bathwater, right? Because like
Yeah, that's it.
that's really dangerous. But like maybe I should ask the question in this way: like, would you say that they would you incentivize them to take up the same lifestyle as you were having, or would you uh, incentivize them to find a different way?
Well, the best I could do is incentivize them to find a way, and if they need guidance in that respect, I'm more than willing to provide it. But I'm not going to tell them to sort of, oh, you have to get a farm, you have to do this, you have to do that. I'll be more
Uh,
like, what would you like to do?
yeah,
And
but
try.
there's a way in which you say, well, like, oh, like I thought about this for like 5 years and it was perfect. These 5 whole years, and like I now have the answer, right?
Okay, all right. Well, they should go out and mimic that and whatever I did perfectly. Then
So
um,
yeah, yeah. So don't be the muppet I was, but
don't be the no, don't most definitely do not be the Muppet I was. But
but
all the
see
good
all the
parts of me,
glory, like
yeah. But see, all the you're supposed to be as good as I was good, and you're not supposed to be any way bad.
nice. Okay. Yeah. So is there different aspects, right? Like do you want to be a teacher, or do you want to be like a boss, or like a leadership position where you also have like a educational role somewhat, or like how do you see that professional side developing?
Oh, I mean, it would be with the aim of just supplying. Part of it would be just supplying the means for the family, right? But in on the professional side, it would be something which is, yeah. I mean, it would be family oriented, so it couldn't take up too much time, right? Um,
Okay.
and so in that way, I probably wouldn't be having a leadership position there. I'd probably be just kind of getting along to get on, sort of employee sort of position. Um, maybe training people, right? Training new people coming into wherever I'm working, right? So let's just say, it's a nice, it's a technical company. I mean, I prefer hands-on work, rather than kind of computers too much.
So would you want to like leave the tech and go full on farming then?
Um, I'd consider it, but even just having a few chickens, to be honest, would suit me. I've seen full farms. Like my cousins are cattle farmers or were cattle farmers, and I've heard of the cattle before, and that's a risk waiting to happen. That's me at 30 getting kicked by a cow and not coming home that day. So um, I'd say, you know relative, like there'd be some sort of nature, but I don't think I'd go full farming. I don't have the knowledge, and a lot of farmers, you know those guys they have the knowledge. I'd have to ask them, and they wouldn't really be too forward with it, because I'd have to learn from them, and you know they mightn't want to facilitate that. So I'd probably be doing some sort of technical profession, um, you know, maybe not electrician, but something to do with electricity or something like that, because that's just a bit of knowledge, a bit of technical know-how that I have that's relatively, you know, commonplace.
Okay, like is there something that we missed, like something that you might aspire to that we want to touch upon? Like maybe activity in actual church, for example. Like, would you want to have an educational role there?
That depends on whether there's the space for it. To be honest, there is, let's say, space there right now, but am I, let's say, educated enough? Have I had enough stuff passed on to me where I'm sort of fit for that role? I don't think I have yet. In 5 years, I don't even think I'll have that. Um, but if nobody else is going to do it, I suppose I could give it my best try. You know?
It's a sense of humility there. It's like, yeah. So I guess a different way of saying that is you don't feel suited for that role.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say so, on account of the fact that I was a convinced atheist for most of my youth, and I'm only really beginning on the journey of that sort of
Mhm.
life or relationship.
Yeah. So my pastor was a convinced atheist at the start of his life, right? So
Yeah,
there is a flip that you can make, and I think having been there, right? Like having had the experience, having the contrast allows you for a different and probably deeper appreciation of what is, right? Because
mm,
uh, yeah, I had this idea recently. It's like, okay, like let's just remove an aspect, right? Like a virtue from the world, right? Like what would things look like, right? Like, and so if you've never realized the absence of a thing, right? Like there's an appreciation or an understanding that you cannot participate in.
yeah,
Um, so we've been talking about faith crisis and meaning crisis, right? Like that those go literally to these lacks of certain understandings. So yeah, like maybe you have like a specific niche or something, because I think that's where we always end up, right? Like we always end up in a niche where we're like, okay, like I can do this, and like I know I can do it better than other people because whatever
yeah,
reason. Um, and but you're not there yet. Like you're in some sense you're still looking up and you're like, okay, there's a big mountain. like
yeah,
I don't know what I'm looking at
yeah,
when I'm looking down. It's like the swamp of sorrow. Like,
yeah, yeah. Well, that'd be. I'd say if said that to me and most of my friends would be like, yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
okay. So yeah, then I want to ask you like is there an insight that you've gained uh, by going through this trajectory in your life?
Yes. Um. Don't don't let. Yeah. Let's make it simple. Don't let unnecessary obstacles get in the way, because there's something on the other side, and it matters what's on the other side. Um. And you need to find out what that is.
Mhm. So you made a qualifier unnecessary. So now I'm interested in, are there necessary obstacles? Like how are you making this distinction?
But what's I said don't let
Don't let
unnecessary.
unnecessary obstacles get in your way.
Okay. I don't know why I use that. Don't let obstacles get in your way unnecessarily. Let's say.
Yes. Okay.
There we are.
That.
That's the proper way to frame it, right? Because there are necessary obstacles, and you need to deal with them. But if they're in the way and you get around them, and they're not they don't need to be there, fire ahead, because otherwise you're just going to stay in the same place all the time.
Well, that's the beginning of wisdom there. So there's hope for you. So yeah, I want to ask everybody else to respond with their takeaway, so that Adam can get more insight in himself and his journey, and that we can give him a kickstart up until this. What is it? 16 member family or
14.
40? Well, that is 16 because there's two adults there.
There we
Hopefully.
go. Yeah. 14
uh,
children.
so yeah, thanks for being a guest, and I hope you enjoyed it. And
Thank you. I
see
did, yeah.
everybody next time in the next episode of Unfolding the Soul.